Hello everyone, I recently did a video on me retiring from racing, and one of the most asked questions on that video was how did I pay for my racing alongside trying to find a wage just to live a day-to-day life. So I'm going to talk today all about how I used to try and find money for my racing, how sponsorship deals work, how paying for racing works, and I'm also hoping this will be quite useful for people that are just starting out in racing or younger riders that are trying to find ways to fund their racing. So I hope this helps a few people and answers a few questions. So firstly, I think quite a big shock for a lot of people was that a lot of motorbike racers pay for their racing, and unfortunately that's just part of our sport now. The costs of racing have increased dramatically over the last few years, and unfortunately it's just the harsh reality of it. It's not nice, but we do an expensive sport, and yeah, it's just the way it is. 20 or 30 years ago there was a lot more tobacco money in racing. When my dad was racing, every team was sponsored by some kind of cigarette company, and now it's all changed. So you have to try and get creative in ways to pay for your racing. The other hard part of our sport is, unfortunately, the higher up the ranks you go in racing, the more expensive it gets. The cost of bikes, staff, travel, just everything that goes with racing as you go up through the ranks just becomes more and more and more. So unfortunately the costs rise with that, and teams can't always find all of the money to go racing for the year, so that's where the rider has to sometimes come in and bring money to the team. So firstly, how does paying for a ride actually work? Well, it depends from team to team. The one thing I'm not going to do in this video is talk about the exact figures of sponsorship and the costs of certain levels of racing, mainly because for some of the teams that I used to race for, there's contracts in place that I shouldn't really talk about what's inside the contract. And secondly, I don't know the exact costs and the ins and outs of a lot of these teams and levels of racing, and I don't want to talk about things I don't know 100% the truth on. Firstly, how exactly does it work? Well, when you pay for a ride in racing, it varies from team to team, but generally most of the costs are up front. When you start the season, you're going to need a bike, you're going to need staff in place, you're going to need a lot of infrastructure that unfortunately is expensive and needs to be paid for up front. So generally the way rides are paid for is a good chunk of the money is paid up front, and then during the year there'll be 3 or 4 more payments where you just sort of pay as you go. So the reason teams do that and riders do that is if you do 3 races with a team and you all fall out, then you haven't paid all of your money up front. It's not always how it works, but most of the time that's what happens. So as you rise through the ranks of racing, when you first start out, no one's getting paid to race. There's just people that are trying to pave their way in the racing world, hopefully make it one day and hopefully get to the level where they can be fortunate enough to be paid. Now, as you rise through the ranks in racing, the levels of money in it increase, as I said before. So if we use MotoGP as an example, the riders at the front of that class are getting paid more than anyone in any other racing championship in the world. But sometimes at the back of that class, there will also be riders that are paying more than any other championship in the world, and the reason is because of the cost. The riders at the front are the most sought after riders, so teams have to pay a premium for them, and the rides at the back of that class are also the most sought after, so riders that want to be on that grid. There's been lots of examples of it through the years. I don't know, I've never seen people's contracts in MotoGP, so I couldn't say for definite who has and who hasn't, but that's just part of it. So some of you will know that I have a Patreon page where people can write in and ask me questions for these videos. So thank you to everyone that's given me questions this week, and they've been very useful in helping me structure this video. So the first question I got asked on my Patreon page was, how did I go about finding sponsorship? And there's no one answer for that. It changed from year to year. As the world has changed and the world of social media and the internet has changed, I tried to use that to my advantage. So when I was younger, and I was just trying to find sponsors, there's no real easy way to sort of say that's exactly what you do and that's how you go find sponsorship, because I've found over the years that lots of different things work and some things work better than others. One thing that has worked quite well for me is being on track days, because generally people there are interested in motorbikes. There's often companies there that are associated with track days or people from companies, and a lot of the time I've bumped into people there, got talking to them, and they've wanted to help me out with my racing. So that was one way I found sponsorship. So at the end of 2011, I was 18 years old, and it basically got to the point where I was going to have to find a huge chunk of money for racing the next season. And I won't say the exact figure, but it was massive. So basically, at the end of 2011, I left the Grand Prix paddock and I was going to have to try and find a way to find money to go racing the next season. I came up with an idea, which I guess now is called crowdfunding. I'm not sure if crowdfunding was about then, maybe it was, but this was a sort of slightly different approach to a GoFundMe page, where basically I sold squares of my helmet for £100. So the idea was that people could buy a 2 centimetre square on my helmet, and it meant that people that couldn't normally afford to sponsor racers could sponsor me. So I had some companies that bought 5 squares and put their company logo across 5 squares. I had individuals that just wanted to try and help me on my way that bought 1 square. And that first year, I sold 100 squares, which raised £10,000 towards my racing, which was absolutely amazing. That was more than I ever imagined. So that was the second way, crowdfunding effectively. The third way was to try and contact companies directly. And this was what I found the most challenging method. I didn't really have much success with it, but it didn't stop me trying. Every winter I have contacted, I couldn't even tell you how many I've contacted, but one winter, it was the winter actually where I launched it was called My Squares, where I had squares on my helmet campaign. And I wrote to about 500 companies on Facebook. I just spammed people with messages with everything about my life, my racing, what I was trying to do, where I was trying to go. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, that method had the least success for me. I did gain some sponsors through it, but I think the problem with that method was you're a lot of the time contacting companies that have no interest in motorcycle racing. And the one thing I've learned over the years is unless there's somebody within that company that's got an interest in motorcycle racing, your chances of getting sponsored by that company are slim to none. That, I think, is why meeting people on track days had a much higher success rate for me, because it meant that I was being introduced to people that already had some kind of interest in motorbike racing. Another good example of that is when my dad raced for the Cadbury's Boost Yamaha team. For 3 years they were sponsored by Cadbury's Boost, and at the end of the 3rd year the guy that was in charge, who had a real interest in motorbike racing, left, and quickly with it the sponsorship left too. So that's kind of how a lot of sponsorship in racing works. There's generally someone within the company that's got an interest in it, and that's where the money comes from. So I was asked on my Patreon page, did companies come to me? And the honest answer to that is no, a lot of the time. I did come across some companies that wanted to sponsor me, but I think the problem with waiting for sponsors to come along to you is most companies are contacted, not just from our sport, by lots of other sports, by charities, by Tom, Dick and Harry, that are all after some kind of money to help something that they're doing. So if you just sit and wait for companies to come to you, they're presented with so many different options every year that it's unlikely they will come to you. Some brands may have an interest in you, but I found them few and far between. So as I said, the world of the internet changed over my racing career, and I tried to use that to my advantage as much as I could. And last year I launched a campaign on my YouTube channel called You Race. So as I said, the world of the internet changed throughout my racing career, and that also changed a lot of the ways that I tried to go after sponsorship. So 2 years ago, I came up with the idea to try and launch a campaign on YouTube to try and help my racing for the year after. So the way I was going to pay for my racing was through the ad revenue that comes through YouTube videos, affiliate links through Amazon, my Patreon page where people could contribute money. Hopefully, along the way of me raising awareness of me trying to find money, sponsors would come on board that had seen my campaign to try and get some money together to go racing. I was completely blown away. The support that I received off everyone I'm still blown away by it now. It was amazing, and I'm forever grateful for that, because without that money I wouldn't have gone racing the year after. So that was really successful. It was a bit of a one-off. I don't know if it was because I was kind of the first person in the UK to try that method that I had some success with it, but it worked really well. It was a lot of work. I was effectively working for the money because I was making YouTube videos and going after all of the money, but it was a way that I could quite quickly get some money together that I needed for the start of the season. Another one of the questions on my Patreon page was, how much sponsorship money do you ask for? And that is the golden question. There's been times where I've asked for sponsorship and I've asked for too much money and basically just been ignored and told to go away. There's been other times where I felt that I've asked for sponsorship money and not asked for enough because they just said yes far too easily. So there's no easy way to do it. It's kind of a case-by-case basis. Yeah, obviously the bigger the company, generally there's more budget there, so it's kind of easier to ask for more money. Having said that, I've had lots of little companies that have helped me along the way, and the saying, every little helps, really does ring true, because without all the money that I'd raised over the years, I wouldn't have had a shot at racing motorbikes. So yeah, there's no easy way to sort of approach the subject, and yeah, I did find it difficult at points, but you've just sort of got to do it on a case-by-case basis. I was also asked what is the most bizarre sponsorship deal I've had, and there's been a few over the years. Because I'd contacted so many random companies, I've met so many random people through motorbike racing, through all walks of life. I've also had some random sponsorship deals off the back of it. Well, bizarrely, I've actually been sponsored by 2 nursing homes over the years, separate companies. For whatever reason, people that own nursing homes seem to have an interest in motorbike racing, and they were really great sponsors to me. Now, my one piece of golden advice that I could give to anyone that is looking for sponsorship or has sponsors on board is to always over deliver on everything that you say you're going to do. I would always try and find as much value for that sponsor as I can, whether that be through branding across my leathers, helmets, social media, whether that was getting them along to races, whether that was taking them out on track days. There's all manner of ways that you can look after people, and it's just about finding what that person is interested in your racing for and how you can provide value to them. So I've always tried to go the extra mile and really look after people, and a lot of the time I would try and hold things back that I was going to give them during the year. So yeah, I could over deliver during the year and they would have a better time than they were expecting. So I've always tried to do that right from whenever I first started racing. I've always tried to look after people, and that served me well. I've managed to keep a lot of my sponsors for a long time, and I'd like to think that was because I looked after them as best I could. I've heard so many nightmare stories through racing, and I've seen sponsors come and go in racing where riders have got them on board and just not looked after them. And I don't know, it doesn't sit right with me that. I've always been really grateful for everything I've got. I've always tried to do the best I can for everyone. So yeah, my one piece of advice would be to make sure you look after everyone that's on board. So alongside a nursing home, I also had a sponsor, which was a vodka company, and this was the most bizarre sponsorship deal I've ever had. Unfortunately, I won't name the brand of the vodka, but it doesn't actually exist now. The guy came along and he must have loved his product. Basically, he was just full of vodka 24/7, turning up to race meetings, and he actually became a bit of a nuisance. As you can imagine, I've got a lot of guests there, the team are trying to work, the staff there, and he was coming along full of vodka, and it wasn't ideal. So that was probably the most bizarre one. Vodka isn't the best sponsorship for an athlete. You can't really do a lot with the vodka sponsorship. So yeah, that probably wasn't the best sponsor I've had over the years. It was entertaining, but yeah, not ideal. So the one other question that sort of comes with all of this was, how did I pay to live as well as race at the same time? And really, once you get to a certain level of racing, a normal living wage in the UK it's not going to pay for motorbike racing. I did a video last year on Superstock racing, and we worked out with the team that the cost was upwards of £200,000 for a year's racing, and there's not many jobs in the UK that are going to give you that as well as a wage to live. So unfortunately, that's just part of it, and that's why you have to find sponsorship. So obviously there wasn't any jobs I could do alongside racing that was going to pay me that as well. I actually watched a Netflix documentary, I think it's called Bad Sport, where there's a guy that races cars and he basically pays for his entire racing career by trafficking drugs. I mean, it probably worked for him. That wasn't the option that I saw would work for me, so I had to find other ways. And basically the way I paid for my racing was through sponsorship, and then I would work in between. So the way I did it basically was I would try and get as much sponsorship in as I could and then work in between. So the money I earned in between paid for me to live. I've tried to live my life for the last 10 years, not through being tight, but just I've tried to live as cheaply as I can. I was very lucky a lot of years, whether I raced for BMW and Suzuki, and I've also had XL vehicle leasing company that have sponsored me with cars and vans over the years. So that was one cost that I managed to save. I lived with my parents for a long time, so that saved me a cost, and I was very grateful for that. But yeah, I've lived like a cheapskate for a lot of years, and I'm not afraid to admit that. That's what I did. That was how I could survive on the money that I could earn outside of racing and use the rest of the money to pay for my racing. Cue all the Scottish tight jokes now, but that's just how I did it. So I hope this video has answered a lot of questions. I'm sure it's probably raised more questions than it's answered. Thank you to my Patreon people that asked me a lot of those questions, and I'll be back next week with another video.